Well, Chippewa Falls is a small town, and I had many relatives who lived on farms in Sewing County. And as a kid, I would spend time in the summer at the farm, and of course, they all had bigger teams of draft horses and things like that, and I just, it was an animal that just had a magnetism for me. I was a horse-crazy little boy, and I begged for a horse for many, many, many years. Finally, when I was 10 years old, my mother and father said, well, we'll buy you a grade horse, a cheap horse we'll keep in the backyard. We lived on a 5-acre tract of land, and we had a woodshed to convert to a stable. But they said, now, the very first minute that she's neglected, she's going to go. So that sort of forced me to become very horsey from then on in. I had to take care of the horse totally, and I found out it was something I really, really liked. Just within a year or so of falling so much for the horse, I went to my first horse show in the area, the Eau Claire Bit and Spur Club horse show at Eau Claire, Wisconsin. It was an annual show that featured American saddlebred horses. So all of a sudden, although I kept my grade horse till I think she passed away at 34, belonging to a cousin, I was very, very interested in saddlebred horses, not just any old horse. In terms of my education with horses, it was observation and basically self-taught. I didn't understudy under any horse trainer. I had a number of people in the area that had saddlebred horses, and so I would be there, at the scene, bugging them when they were working horses and things like that. And the fun part about learning was that it was a small town, and many families knew that I liked horses and was with them a lot, and so if they had a child who wanted to learn to ride, they would call the Bartz boy and see if he would help them learn to ride. That sort of led to summertime work. Fortunately, when I went to school, costs were not nearly as expensive as they are today, and I did have a scholarship to go to the University of Wisconsin. So what I needed was some, spending money, but I didn't have to work construction and earn a huge amount and whatnot. So I hired on as a camp counselor for Camp Red Arrow, a very well-regarded old line camp. We evolved a really nice riding program at Camp Red Arrow, and I was there for the 4 summers in between my starting college and graduating. Being a Wisconsinite, I went to school at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. I always wanted to be ahead of the game, and yet I didn't like to spend a lot of time studying, so I found a place I could hole up and get away from all the beer drinking and the fun stuff so that I could focus enough hours a week to stay ahead of the thing. I met Carol by way of the Hoofers Outdoor Athletic Club. I was a riding instructor in the program there for Hoofers. One of the things they did outside was ride. And she came to a riding lesson on one Saturday, and although we had 2 rings operating at the facility where we had the riding lessons, and I was not teaching in the ring she was in, she fell off. And as a result, I had to fill out an accident report before the day was over as they left. She didn't get hurt, but I had to fill out the accident report. So about a week later, I was trying to cozy up to someone that I wanted to have a date with. On a Sunday night, we didn't have residence hall food, so we could go out to Picnic Point for a bonfire picnic dinner. And then I got around to calling this girl named Betsy Brenzel, and of course she said, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm busy. Oh, shucks, now what do I do? Well, anyway, I thought, oh, there was that good-looking girl at the riding lessons last week. Why don't I call her? I looked her up in the dormitory phone book. And so I called Carol Severson. She said, yeah, that'd be fun. Yes, that'd be fun. When I went to pick her up at Elizabeth Waters, the largest women's dormitory in the world, out comes this girl that I wasn't looking for. I was looking for someone whose name I didn't know, but I picked her name because it's the one I had written for the accident report. Anyway, it's just interesting because we did make sort of a connection there, and we did a lot of things with other people at the university who liked horses, and especially saddlebred show horses and whatnot. We would plan every year to go into the Chicago International Livestock Show, which had a very nice saddlebred show at that point in time. And in fact, Wing Commander was wrapping up his big-time career then, and at least 2 years, I think we went in to see Wing Commander. We'd go in like on the train from Madison. But I never had quite enough money, even though I worked part-time in school and everything else, so I would sell blood in order to get the money together for the share of the train ticket and the show ticket and the hotel bill and whatnot. So, but it was 25 bucks a pint, and you could do it every 3 months. So I did it every 3 months for about 4 years. That's, I don't know what else to say except that, you know, we really, really liked the horse, that breed of horse, and we followed it as best we could within the circumstances that we were living. As far as my future goals when I was going to the university, you know, obviously they didn't have any courses in horse training, so it just looked like the right thing to do would be to get a general kind of a business degree. I graduated at the top of my class in business. And as a result, when it was time to interview for jobs, it was at a time when there were lots of corporations that came to campus for interviews and things like that, and I interviewed with 4 or 5 or 6 of the big names. The last one I visited was Minneapolis Honeywell, which was a good-sized firm operating in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I really had already decided I was going to go with U.S. Steel, but my brother and his wife had moved to Minneapolis, and I thought, well, let Minneapolis Honeywell fly me to Minneapolis for a job interview, and I'll see Ross and his wife, Joanne. It was an interesting company at the time, and the job they were looking to fill was appealing, and the controller just finally said, well, we want you. What's the best offer you've had from somebody else? I understand you've had several. And I told him, he said, well, we'll beat it by $50 a month. And back in 1956, you know, what the hell, that was $600 a year. That was a lot of money then. So I went to work for Minneapolis Honeywell. We had a horse or two, and you know, followed that all as a side interest at the time. It was a hobby. And about, I don't know, it was the spring of the year when I was in trying to help the president. We were there working one Sunday morning on his aspect of the financial plan, and when we got done after 2 or 3 hours of digging, he finally said, well, Keith, you know, what's going on? You know, how are we doing here? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, I mean, let's say, you know, we've been treating you very well, right? And I said, oh, yes. And he said, well, if you could just tell me what job you wanted, you know, what would you be aiming at here in the next 5 or 10 years or whatever? And I just got caught flat-footed. There wasn't any damn job in that place I wanted. So he named my boss first, and I said, no, I wouldn't want Al's job. Then he named the controller, and I said, oh, no. And finally he said, well, you know all the people with the big bucks around here. He said, how about my job? And I said, you're here on Sunday morning with me working on the budget when we'd both rather be out. He said, we'd both rather be out with the horses, right? And I said, that's right. And he said, well, you go home and have a talk with your wife and decide what you think is best. And I did. And she said, well, do what you want. So I went in the next morning and gave my 2-week notice. And we left. And anyway, and as we left, all the vice presidents and section directors what I said, oh, our kids all want to learn to ride, you know, will you help them? And we said, okay, we'll talk about it. So we very shortly opened a horsemanship school and started from scratch on a little 4-acre farm we owned at the time. We purchased a property that was sort of in a hollow, and we called it Hollow Haven Farm. We thought the right thing to do was to try to teach people how to ride on our breed of horse. There had been, as I mentioned, some hunt seat places and whatnot, but it was just, there weren't any people really teaching. It was a wonderful time in Minneapolis for show barns. We had several really big name horse trainers who operated show barns there, but none of them taught people how to ride. It was in a day and age when advertising was not really expensive. In the Minneapolis Star and Tribune classified section, we had in the horses for sale section, I believe, we had an ad saying riding lessons. And we ran it all the time. And so we got lots of calls and we got lots of people. And of course the people we started with, the children of the Honeywell people, they all had friends. So gradually it grew and it wasn't very long before we were giving 100 to 150 riding lessons a week, year in and year out. In the mid to late 60s, I hurt my back and was grounded from doing much horse training myself, mostly groundwork, but by then we were big enough so that somebody had to be out shopping to buy horses and somebody else had to be out judging and things like this, so I just naturally ended up doing those sorts of things. Very fortunately, Carol was able to shoulder some of the training necessities in the barn too, mostly those aimed at the riders that she was teaching and that sort of thing, equitation riders. So Carol was very active. She was in the barn on a regular basis, and not just teaching, but also working some horses. In terms of our lesson program, it was ultimately aimed at bringing new people into the show horse business. So those people who really had a talent and those who were willing to write the checks, we immediately tried to encourage them to own a horse and then to move up the ladder as they got more skillful or as they needed a horse to challenge them. So we gradually, at the same time that the riding school was running, we were running a good training operation. As a result of going to a lot of horse shows with lots of newcomers and kids and whatnot, we were involved in the local horse association right from day one. Tri-State Horsemen's Association was the name of the Tri-State organization there, and I was active with them. I was president a couple of different times. As far as involving myself in national type organizations, UPHA was just formed originally in the 60s. I can't remember the exact time, but I was a member of the first year of people who joined the UPHA. Lots of the issues were the horse shows didn't have proper footing. The horse shows didn't have the facilities they should that suited the trainers, and yet it was very difficult to get them to think about what individual people wanted, so it was determined that why didn't the horse trainers form an organization and see what they could do to improve conditions for horses, for the trainers, and for their owners at horse shows. And then it was about that time that American Horse Show Association, which of course, as you all remember, is USEF today, was making some changes in their governance and whatnot, and they had decided that each zone chairman would become a vice president. And therefore, I went onto the board of directors of the American Horse Shows Association. It was an interesting time because I think we were getting lots of good things done at that point in time for our industry, both in terms of UPHA's influence and the American Horse Shows Association influence. When I began with the Licensed Officials Committee, and when I was on the board of the AHSA as a zone vice president and whatnot, all the meetings were in New York City. And needless to say, from a little country bumpkin from the Midwest, it was kind of a pain to have to go in for all these meetings. But it just seemed like there wasn't much we could do about it. Well, as time went on, we got the thoughts that the association truly needed more space. The space we had in New York was so frightfully expensive. So ultimately the smart thing happened, and a potential relocation committee was appointed. And that ultimately led to the decision to relocate to the Midwest. And Midwest, although Red Crabtree doesn't believe me, Kentucky is part of the Midwest. It just was no longer something that had to be headquartered out of New York City. But there were a number of people who resisted it. And interestingly enough, some of those people got on the bandwagon pretty quickly after we had the new building. They said, well, this was the right thing to do. I had been involved with the American Saddlebred Horse Association. It was called then, it had a little different name, but it was ASHA. A group of people had decided that we should have a new museum, and they embarked upon a fundraising program to do it. And we involved some people that were really going to be big-time helpers and whatnot, but then it just sort of fell flat in the water. And I was at this meeting of the museum's annual gathering when the people who'd put up a pretty good chunk of change said, we're not happy that this is not going anywhere. And in fact, if you don't get on the ball and do something, we might withdraw our commitment. Shortly after this meeting, Carol and I went to visit Ed and Susie Teeter. Ed said they need somebody to raise the money for that building. Why don't you do that? This was a need that needed to be filled. They needed to have that money. And even though I wasn't sure I could do it, I thought I can take this much time away from my life work to do this. And somebody's got to do it, so we're going to do it, right?
That's right.
And she said, yeah, go ahead, that's right, especially with the way it was set up to begin with, thinking it was just a transient thing. It was not going to be a life work change. This was going to be accomplishing something for the museum and the industry, and then we'd be back to Hollow Haven Farm.
Well, yes, because said, would you do this if we didn't have the farm, if you didn't have a family, if you didn't have anything? And he said, yes, I would. And I said, so we'll manage.
Within about 3 weeks of having arrived there, the decision was to close the museum on Main Street immediately and break ground for the new building at the Kentucky Horse Park within the next week or 10 days. Within about a week after we broke ground, I was asked if I would continue on and oversee the construction. You know, we had a good construction firm doing it, whatnot, but they still needed somebody on top to look at it. So, and I said, well, yes, I would. So then, but about 9 months later, they said, will you stay on and be the director? And in the meantime, we had a young man named Andy Frieseth who had been working for us as a trainer, and he was to the stage where he wanted to have a place of his own. And then he came back and he said, well, what would you sell Hollow Haven Farm to me for? So it was a cinch that if we let it go to Andy in the right way, he'd be very successful. That was '84 that I started to do this, and in '96 we got to the stage where we thought we had it pretty well under control. Everything was working well, and I had staff under me that I thought was going to work out. And in the fall that year, I asked the Board of Trustees if I could retire in the end of 1996. And they didn't like that idea. I said to Carol, what shall we do? She said, well, why don't you see if they'll let you telecommute? So I went back the next day and I said, what do you think? So it was actually 98 when I retired fully. I've done a lot of volunteer work. I've been on the board for the Saddlebred Museum, and I've served on a number of committees for the American Saddlebred Horse Association, like the Futurity Rules Committee, the Pleasure Horse Committee, the Nominating Committee. I can't think of all of them, you know. If they needed something done and they asked me, I was never smart enough to say no thanks, which is also the way I guess I continued to stay involved with USEF. And I guess if I was asked, I would say, if you think I can do it, I think I can do it, so I'll try. Once in a while, your length of service and your common old sense helps solve a problem there.
And as long as he vacuums the floor and clears the dishwasher, we get along fine.
We really still do participate in some major horse shows and enjoy it a lot. We've retained our box at the Lexington Junior League Horse Show for many years, and it's a lot of fun to go early in July and catch up with everybody and see all those wonderful horses trotting around the Red Mile. And then we also go to the Kentucky State Fair, which is the world's championship horse show for our breed of horse.
A few years back, we were sitting there during the amateur 5-gaited championship and started looking at all the riders in there. There were, 19, 20 of them. And I thought, oh, I know that one and that one. Counted up, there were 6 riders in that championship class on 5-gaited horses that we had either started or had helped through the years. And I said, Keith, look at that. And, well, we were just quite pleased.
Well, it was just a reminder that so many of the people we started in the business stayed in the business.
For what is a man? What has he got? If not himself, then he has not to say the things he truly feels, and not the words of one who kneels. The record shows I took the blows and did it my way. Yes, it was my